I'm Marit Weisenberg, and this is the story behind my stories.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Marit Weisenberg.
Today's episode is sponsored by editor Ellen Campbell. Authors, if you are looking for someone to help shape your words into what you originally intended them to be, Ellen can help you do that. Ellen is one of the most sought-after indie editors out today, and she is one of the best. I've used her. So many other people in the community have used her. There's a link to her website in the show notes. I'll be talking more about her as the month goes on. As always, after the show, there's an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Marit Weisenberg on the show with me. Marit has a fantastic new book. It's called Select Few. It's the second book in the Select series. And guys, I've had this book for several weeks now, and it is amazing. You guys are just really going to love it. I'm excited to talk with you today. Marit, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. And you got my name right. That's awesome.
Thanks. I've been practicing all morning. Before we get into all the awesome stuff that we're going to talk about, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I was thinking about that. It all comes down to one summer where me and my neighbor friends, there were a bunch of us girls, and we were so bored. And we were watching a lot of TV, and finally we just started writing these scenes. And I was pretty young, probably around 10 or 11. And I was so happy sitting at that typewriter, or keyboard, whatever it was then. And I remember just writing scene after scene and thinking, I love this, and I've never felt this way, that I'm in my element. And then, years went by, and my friend, one of those girls, Sophie, and we had Latin class together, and we would just, we started a romance novel, and we would just pass it back and forth. And yeah, it was pure happiness for me.
That is so funny. I actually have a memory that I remembered a while back that I had just completely forgotten. When I was in high school, we had typing class, which is a long forgotten thing,
I did too.
Yeah, and we had these IBM Selectric typewriters, and just this monster of a machine that when you had your hands on it, you knew you had your hands on it. But we did all these just rote drills, all year, typing. And a friend of mine and I started making up stories, and we would write a page and swap pages. And I had forgot. I was kind of reading over your bio and saw, that story that you just mentioned there. And I said, oh, wow, I did that too. That is so awesome. It's one of those things where when you're bitten by the bug, it's going to come out. And now the things that you would have gotten in trouble for in school, people pay you to do. It's crazy.
Exactly. I know.
It's so funny. So were you a big reader as a kid?
Yes, I was a huge reader, and especially, it's funny, my younger daughter was talking about introverts, and we were listening to this TED Talk about introverts and how, it's okay if you want to stay at home and read a book. But I remember that always in high school being this tension, like, I know I should be going out with my friends, and I would, but what I really wanted to do was be home, sitting in my bed, reading a book. So yeah, that was always the thing.
What kind of stories really resonated with you?
Oh, I think for sure romance. I loved them. And I mean, and then, there's nobody like Judy Blume for middle grade. I mean, I read those books cover to cover so many times, and those are the ones I think about a lot. So, a lot of paperback romances, and a lot, as well as classics that I was reading for school. And then, later in life started reading more literary stuff on my own. But, what was really missing for me was the whole YA genre. I mean, I would have eaten that up. So, because that had a little bit of everything.
A Facebook friend of mine the other day posted that she was meeting Judy Blume in person that night, and I commented and I said, "Will you take my 30-year-old copy of Super Fudge and ask her to sign it for me, please?"
Oh my gosh! I mean, yeah, we just went through them again, and there's nothing like it. Those characters,
they're
she's
amazing
a genius.
They're amazing stories. So at what point, Marit, did you know that this was going to be something you were going to pursue in life? A lot of us know we have the storytelling gene or whatever, but when there's going out into the world and finding your own way, there are bills to pay and families to raise and all of that stuff. And writing, the kind of unbridled love of storytelling a lot of times takes a backseat to real life, and I'm big air quotes here, real life. What did you decide to do after school and moving into life? What path did you take?
Well, it was funny. I really didn't think that I didn't pursue writing, but what I did was I got very, very close to it. So, I love stories. I always, loved my English classes the most. And then when I was a senior in college, I took a film studies class, and that all of a sudden I realized, okay, I could teach film. So I went to UCLA for grad school in film and television critical studies. And pretty soon, but that got me to Los Angeles. And all of a sudden I thought, no, what I want to do is actually work with stories instead of just talk about them. So I got a job working for the director, Mimi Leader, at her production company. And I loved it. So I worked in development and I kind of rose up the ladder and I worked for screenwriter John Ridley. And so I got so close to writers and I saw these working writers. And so I think it was amazing because I later, when I took a chance on writing, I'd had the advantage of seeing people making a living doing it. So I think I was a little naive thinking, I can do this as a job. It was a big leap of faith. And I don't think I quite understood what a huge one it was. But so I worked, at production companies, and then I ended at Disney working at the studio. And I then we moved, because of my husband's job, we moved to Austin. And I found myself kind of in this quiet period of really trying to figure out, what to do. And I was really stressed out about it. And kind of a few times I'd tried writing and I never stuck with it. I had a few chapters here and there. And I just kind of said, now or never. I'm not going to do it if I don't do it now. And sorry, I'm kind of going on and on, but I remembered how my friend Sophie, my Latin friend, my really good friend who I wrote the romance novel with in Latin class, her grandmother was an author. And I remember hearing how she had 4 kids and she'd wake up at 4 a.m. and write. And she wrote 2 books a year. And she wrote basically kind of young adult novels at that time. And Patsy Goes to Prom, that kind of thing. Yeah. And she was a really great author. And I just knew somehow I was going to do that. And I one day decided to start waking up at 5. And I just kind of treated it like training for a marathon. So that's how I got started, finally.
That's epic. You wound up very close to some serious writers and serious storytellers, and in a serious storytelling environment. There's historically not much bigger storytellers than Disney. I mean, they have told stories that we all know, we all remember, that have been integral pieces of our childhood and growing up. Looking back now, because I would imagine when you're there, you're kind of in the machinery of it all.
Yes.
But looking back on it now, do you see that experience and just being in a creative place like that, how did that impact you as a storyteller yourself?
Well, I think probably reading so many screenplays for so many years. I mean, that must have kind of eked into me, the rhythm of it. That's my closest guess. And I think too, when I did leave it, I was really in mourning actually, because I don't think I knew how lucky I was to be absolutely surrounded in that. I mean, you get really, a day to day job becomes a day to day job, but I was in the epicenter of stories, and it was really great.
That's so awesome. You mentioned something earlier about YA stories, and that when you and I were growing up, there weren't a lot. There wasn't really a defined genre like we see it today, and
Right.
just kind of that juggernaut genre that it is today. What was your first experience of realizing those types of stories were out there, and how did that change the way maybe you thought about telling stories? That maybe this is something you would be interested in plugging into.
Well, I think, when we had The Outsiders, so that
Yeah.
was pretty much the closest. Then, and it was such a, at the time, such a standalone. And now I think what happened was I knew I wanted to write, and I always knew I wanted to write a love story. Then I picked up Rainbow Rowell's Eleanor and Park, and a friend recommended it. And, I just thought, what is this? And of course I'd read The Hunger Games and the Twilight series, and, started to realize, and John Green, and really getting sucked into these books. And in a way, it was just so fun to turn pages like that again. And, but it was Eleanor and Park with that love story that I just thought, I want to do this. I really want to try this.
Nice. So let's jump back to Austin for a minute. You wind up there with your family, mourning the leaving of living in Storyland, and the thing is nagging at you again about writing. How did you get started? You said that you just got up early, like your friend had told you about. What were the first things that started coming out of you?
It's funny. The first book has a scene that takes place at the big natural pool, public natural springs called Barton Springs in Austin. And that scene is pretty much what starts off the book in book one. And that was among one of the first scenes I wrote. And it's funny because it took a very long time to kind of figure out what I was trying to say, but that was in there. And so I woke up, and I think I started writing something vaguely similar to what Celeste became, but that Barton Springs scene was always in there, and really early in the first couple months I started writing. But so I started writing this kind of shapeless thing, trying to figure out what in the world, what it was about. And so that took a really long time.
So that first scene, I'm always interested in how stories form for people, because, we're, none of us are at a loss for ideas, and
Mm-hmm.
I hate that question, well, where do you get your ideas from? Well, they're all around you. You just have to open your eyes. And, but sometimes an inspired idea, that's a different thing, because we can all pull scenarios out of, the news headlines and things like that. But there's something different about that thing that comes alive and just kind of becomes a driver of the story, all its own. What came to you first? You said it was based around this real place. Was the setting front and center for you? Was there a character in this setting?
I had this, I think it comes from, I think I was always sort of interested in really subtle abilities that people have, like, a friend is about to call, you think of them and then the phone rings and it's them, or you think of a song and then it comes right on the radio, just those really strange things. But so maybe that was playing in my mind, but I don't know how I got the idea, but I saw a group of teenage kids who all look really scarily similar, and they are at this big swimming hole, or pool, and other people are holding up their phones and taking pictures of them. There was just something, I don't know if I had the image or if I crafted it, but that's pretty early. I had that thought, and then it was, who are these people? Are they some kind of urban myth that people are really excited about, that they're actually true? And so from there, I tried to figure out, who are these people exactly? And I think the first draft was all about these people, but I kept getting the feedback, no, it's really vague. Who are these people? So, but I love that idea of people who looked, teenagers who looked really similar to a scary point. So that happened early.
Nice. How long did you write the story before Select started forming? When it became the story that it eventually would?
Well, I think it was about it was Kismet, actually, because it was about a year that I was messing around and really not knowing where the story was headed. And then through friends, I met the novelist Amanda Eyre Ward, who's written, she's a great novelist, and she kind of writes literary thrillers. And I think she's written about 7 books now. And so I met her through friends at a happy hour, and I knew she lived near me and she was a big deal. And I happened to sit next to her and started talking to her, and she told me, well, I'm going to teach this class called write your novel or memoir in a year, basically. And I thought, okay, I'll take it. This is great. This will give me some structure. And she was the one who, she was brilliant. And she was like, you need to figure out what this is about. And why don't you do A, B, and C to figure out how to do that? And it was her kind of being the field marshal that whipped me into shape.
Nice. How long did you work on the novel total before you finished the first draft?
So there was that year where I was playing, and then once I started taking Amanda's class, it was 18 months, and then I gave it to her, and then another kind of 6 months of cleanup, and then I started submitting it to agents. So probably it was a three to 3 year total, I think, until I had a decent first draft.
So let's talk about the story a little bit. You've alluded to it and kind of walked around what the gist of the story is, but we've got these people with these powers, if you will, but the story takes kind of a dark turn. Tell us a little bit about it, and how did that aspect of the story come out to you?
Well, I think I've always thought about kind of blended families, and I remember once I wanted to have a girl who was very, very uncomfortable in her own home. And I think it kind of comes from being with friends and visiting their dad's second families, and there was a formality there. And so I was kind of thinking about that. And then I amped it up with a stepmother who really doesn't want you there. And so I wanted somebody who seems to be kind of living in this uber wealthy 1%, incredible group, but she's the outsider. And yet it's more complicated because she is kind of the royal family. She's kind of she is the leader's daughter. So she seems to have it all, but she is deeply uncomfortable. And she's also very in the dark about who her real mother is. They won't tell her. So I knew I wanted that. And then once I started getting really intrigued. I said that I liked the idea about these abilities, but then it got very interesting when I thought about, okay, what about a group of people who have these? Because, they'd have the ability to amass a lot of money. They would be a threat to the powers that be. So I started thinking about, how do they really live? What would they be like? And they would have to move on. People would start to recognize and be suspicious. So, and then I started thinking about, well, they would probably also have the means to have a really good getaway plan. So, there are a lot of, I think once I got the idea for the group, and then once I thought about the outsider within the group, a very lonely but powerful outsider, and then that made the romance very easy, because you have a girl who's just supposed to be loyal to this family. So that, I think it was a bunch of forces that came together.
So we've got this story that is a kind of YA action adventure, some fantasy elements, some mystery elements, that really, kind of combine to be this force of nature that this book is. You really tackle some really deep subjects and give us a lot to think about in the book. Everything from, societal norms and how, classes of people deal with one another and even, people with cultish behavior and all this kind of stuff. Did those things, in the writing, were you thinking about those things, or this just kind of the natural progression of the story?
I think I was definitely thinking about those things. I have this kind of fascination with the 1%. And I do think it comes from working in LA in the entertainment industry, where once in a while a big celebrity would come into the office, and I swear people would say, they're not just like us. They'd be like, wow, they have the bluest eyes I've ever seen, or, and there was kind of this awesome way that, really kind of bigger celebrities had, where they knew that everybody was looking at them, but they would have this kind of look on their face of like, I'm pretending that nobody is looking at me. But it was kind of this wall, and
which is more bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing is bizarre, and it is almost like being on a different plane. And so I've been thinking about that for years, and I wanted to capture that with this family of they're there, but they're not there. They're apart, and it is like there's this wall of glass between them and everybody else. But I did want them to be I wanted there to be some empathy for them, because, they would get in a lot of trouble if they got caught. But so I think, and then I do have this real growing unease about inequality in this country, and it's just growing, and so it's a lot of my own kind of paranoias coming into it too. I think definitely my love for celebrities, but also that like, this is things are scary.
There's an undercurrent of distrust, even though we're fascinated by the whole thing. There's just this thing that we're just not really comfortable with.
Yes. And I was there when I wrote the first book, it was a very different political climate than it is now. And my friend and I were saying, she said, that Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates have a getaway plan. And I was like, what? Are you kidding? Like, really? But I love that idea. And then, when I was writing the second book, there was an article in the New Yorker about billionaires having these doomsday plans. So it's like, oh my gosh, this is a thing.
You're like, what?
Yeah. This is, and should I be worried? But I don't have the means to do much about it. So,
the YA is a really powerful, genre mechanism, whatever, to tell these kinds of stories. What do you think it is? Do you think that we can tell different kinds of stories when we focus on the young adult field than maybe we could in a more traditional literary setting? What do you think it is about the genre that opens up different kinds of stories?
I think at least for fantasy, I think you can get away. You can do fantasy, and I think. But also, I think with contemporary YA, you can also it's firsts, and there's so much raw energy, and there's hope. There's getting into trouble for the first time. There's so many firsts and new possibilities, and so I think that you can. But it's also still considered children's literature, so I think that there is that. You can throw a whole lot of imagination in there too, and explore in different ways. So, I have read literary fiction that does some really kind of very inventive, different ways to tell the story. But yeah, why it just seems like it's a big, wide open field in some ways.
And fantasy elements too. I don't know what it is. It's almost like when it's a fantasy story. There are fantastical elements. Therefore, we allow ourselves to suspend belief for a little bit. And, we know that this is going to happen. Therefore, I'm not so uptight about the story. Maybe it is. Maybe it just allows us to relax a little bit and think about things that we wouldn't if it's just a straight story.
I think so too. I think it's kind of play,
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. Allowing ourselves to just relax and enjoy the story and go where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
So you published the first book. Did you know that this would be more than one book when you wrote that first one?
Sort of. I remember when before we went out for submission, my agent had me do a revision, and I added the book one has a real cliffhanger. And at the last minute, just right before I gave it to her, I just put in this cliffhanger. And she's like, I don't know about this. Most places like to, they can bring up the series, but, they might just want this as a standalone book. And she's like, but, we can say that. So let's just turn it in as it is. And yeah, sure enough, it was bought to have a sequel. So it was, I think it was all kind of, it could have ended, but I'm glad that it didn't. And it was all because of that one last sentence.
Nice. So book 2 is out now. It's called Select Few, and it's the second book in the Select series. Where do we find our friends in this book? What's going on? And how do you take all of the tension and all of the excitement from book 1 and then continue to ramp that up into another installment?
Oh man, it was hard. So the book 2, there's a lot of spoilers. So I'll just say Julia our 17-year-old protagonist, has made some very difficult choices. And she really wants to kind of live her life, but she's living half a life kind of in fear of, there's just a lot of reasons for, I think I'm just going to have to give spoilers. There are a lot of reasons. There are a lot of reasons that her family, she wants to be done and go her own way. And there are a lot of reasons why that might not happen. And she's really hoping that they won't come back for her, but she's sitting on a huge secret and trying to hide it. And also she needs to solve the mystery of who she really is. She doesn't want to solve it, but it becomes pretty integral. She needs to find that out to figure out how to protect the person that she loves. So it becomes a road trip and more of an adventure than book 1. Book 1 takes place squarely in Austin, and book 2 starts in Austin and then hits the road and goes to California and is that summer before college. And it's kind of the bridge between Julia's childhood and becoming an adult. And also with the romance, book 1 is a forbidden romance, and it's all about them getting together. And book 2 is about them, John and Julia have trust issues, and it's kind of about, can this deepen from attraction into something that's real love? So, I had to pull them apart in book 2. That was kind of tough.
With you leaving Austin and going to California, are you kind of backtracking your life
yes,
with these characters?
Sure. Yes, for sure. And a lot of the book was written during a hot summer. And so I was so done with how hot it was in Austin. I mean, both books have so much about the heat. So I think I was like, forget this, fresh start. And I love stories that are, let's go west. And, let's go to just start over. And so I think, wanted her on that journey to kind of get to the promised land. And when I was growing up, my dad was from New York, and he randomly, because of an ad for third year residents, he got this job at a hospital in San Francisco. So he left freezing cold Buffalo, New York. And he said, I could not believe when I got to San Francisco. It was the most amazing place. And I'd never been anywhere with weather like that. So I kind of grew up, thinking of it like opening your eyes to this amazing place. So I wanted her to have that, leaving, trying to shed her past and start fresh and have that journey.
Where book one is a bit of a Romeo and Juliet homage, if you will, what would you compare book two?
Book two is more of a road trip book. It's more of kind of a bigger, coming of age and bigger adventure story. There's more action in it. And there's also what's different about it is I brought in John, Julia's love interest. I brought in his voice. So that was really nice. And it was a balance to the story. So you'd have little interstitials with his point of view.
Nice. Marit, are there more stories in this series to come?
No, there are not. That was the conclusion. So, and I think it ended in a duology. I like that. And I think it ended in a good place. There are a few openings, and there's this one side character, Angus, who I love, and I think about him a lot. And if I ever did write another book, it would be about what happens to him. And for some reason, he is just the easiest character to come to me. He kind of came fully formed, and it's fun for me to write his voice. And who knew that I could write a 18-year-old voice? Like I would enjoy writing an 18-year-old voice, but I really did with him.
Oh, that's so funny. I know when you finish one book, it's not long before the itch comes back and characters start popping up and things like that. What are you working on now that these two books are out in the world?
Well, I'm working on a book that's no fantasy this time. It's a standalone contemporary YA about two insomniacs who live in a cul-de-sac. So it was kind of, the idea came from, I've had a few friends, but in high school, a friend who was an insomniac. And I realized she had this whole other life at night. I didn't know she was friends with certain people. She had boyfriends. I mean, so I love the whole double life thing. And so, so I'm playing with that story, and I just finished a draft of it. So, but you're right. I mean, it's there's a fear, like if I stop, and also, it feels really strange not writing. So, I've just kept going. So we'll see what happens.
Do you see yourself getting into screenplays again, or after living in that world and now writing prose? Is there a draw to get into that?
I don't know. I've thought about that. A friend of mine who writes novels is taking a TV writing class, and I love the idea of even though I've read so many screenplays, I think I've wrote one a long, long time ago. It'd be nice to see if I could not crack it, but if I could do it myself, because I do think it would just be a great challenge. I've always been sort of afraid of it. I don't know why. It was like that thing that the people that were paid tons and tons of money could do. But yeah, I would like to, I think. Books are so free. And I'm kind of an overwriter. So I think that's also why screenplays scare me, because you have to be so efficient. But that actually might really help my writing. So it's something to think about.
For sure. Well, maybe when the film rights for this duology sells, you'll get the screen adaptation.
Yeah, I was thinking if that was ever offered to me, I mean, nobody would ever say no, right? So you'd have to learn under pressure.
Exactly. Marit, the two books, Select and Select Few, are out now. We've got links to them in the show notes at hankgarner.com. It's been such a great joy to talk with you. If people are just learning about you and your work, where can they find you online to maybe dig into everything that you're doing and follow up with news coming up?
Mostly Instagram. And I'm just my name, Marit Weisenberg, on Instagram. And I have a website, but it's pretty, efficient. So yeah, Instagram is more of the day to day.
Excellent. I'll link it up there, and we'll see you over on Instagram. Marit, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show
Thank you
today.
so much. It was great.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I was walking through the woods between Wolfert's Roost and the future site of my father's Stone Manor house. The house would eventually stand on what had been old Baltus's pumpkin field, the land where I had found my grandfather's head. Father had chosen the spot for its view of the Hudson River. Knoll was to be a grand mansion in the Gothic Revival style, but at the time the mansion was but a few foundations of Van Brunt stone. I had become fond of the place already, the idea of it, and I spent many a night alone in a shack on the property. My mother disapproved. She would have me sleep in the room across from hers in our townhouse. But I was 15 and did not answer to her. I kept a bottle of spirits hidden in the crook of 2 walnut trees near old Baltus's grave. I thought he would approve of the gesture. I had stopped along my way to fetch it out. At the moment the first pull of liquor touched my throat, I heard a ghastly, inhuman laugh. I was not alone in the woods. Had God sent the horseman after me? Had I sinned that terribly? I ran through the wood and found the field where Knoll was to be built. The outline of the foundations was barely discernible beneath the snow. An apparition stood there. Though I have seen him many times since, I shall never forget my first glimpse. Gaunt in moonlight, headless, exuding power and malice. A magic thing in the land of the ordinary. The headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow. What chills those words evoke! It charged at me, hatchet raised. I stood transfixed, unable to move, unable to even imagine escape. This was the servant of God, after all, sent to strike down sinners. I hurled the bottle from my hand, ashamed that I had become a drunkard as Baltus had been. It shattered against the foundations of Knoll. I stretched out my arms and awaited judgment. A piercing white light broke the darkness. The horse reared. "Not my Dylan!" cried Agatha, appearing from the wood. She held a skull in her hand. It shone brightly as a diamond. And in that moment I understood. The horseman did not serve God. He served my grandmother. Perhaps in that moment I came to see Agatha and God as one and the same. The unholy spirit fought her command. A foreleg of the demon horse struck my head with such power that I fell backwards with a cry and knew no more. I carry the scar to this day. A slight indentation in my temple, barely noticeable. In my days of courting I was told that when I am angry the patch of insulted skull bone will stand out in a disturbing manner. I have never had occasion to see this phenomenon, however, as I am generally well pleased whenever I pass a mirror.